Hey guys, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Nuns. Today we're studying 2 Kings chapter 13. Let's get started.
Okay, so 2 Kings 13 is an interesting chapter, and it's one of those things where John and I were talking a little earlier, and he just kind of mentioned, some of these historical chapters, they're kind of difficult to kind of pull away a lot of takeaways from. So if you're reading your Bible, and you get to a chapter, and it's got a lot of history. So, for instance, this chapter, aside from the death of Elijah, that John's going to cover, and I'm going to preach about that one on Sunday, so I'm not going to say a whole lot about that, but not here anyway. So, when you get to these chapters that have a lot of history, one of the things that, like, if you're having your quiet time, you're going to try to read this chapter and then just kind of look back and go, all right, here's my takeaway for today. And sometimes some of the history is going to be very difficult to do that with. So at the beginning of this chapter, we have Jehu's son becomes the king. Now remember, he was promised that he would have 4 generations of kings that would reign. So this chapter is going to give us the first 3, just boom, boom, boom. And what's interesting here is none of them were that great and none of them were that noteworthy, so that we're not even through one whole chapter and we already got 3 guys basically in and out of this kind of position. And so what I would just say is, if you are in a spot where you're just looking for a takeaway, sometimes you may struggle with that. But remember, sometimes the point of the chapter is not to give you a takeaway. The point of the chapter is to get you to the next chapter. Because the Bible is not a series of disjointed stories and chapters where every chapter's got to have a moral. That way we learn something, we can move on. No. The Bible tells one big story. The Bible is the story of humanity and how we got to this dreadful, sinful condition, and then how God had a plan to send His Son into the world to die for the sins of the world and to be our Redeemer. And so what we want is, we want every chapter to be David and Goliath, and we go, ooh, I got that one, let's move on. Every chapter is not going to be that, but every chapter will get you further and further along in this story. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting about this chapter is that whenever you're reading it, you're going to find that people kind of constantly go back to the same old habits. So you may have new kings, and they're coming in, but it's going to say, but he did not change, and he followed the ways of his father. And so there's this kind of generational, once somebody gets in a rut, that's pretty much where they stay. And when it says here that they continued in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Well, who was Jeroboam? Jeroboam was the first king of the northern part of the country, and he's the one that created the 2 golden calves. Not the ones from Exodus, but the ones where he tried to convince people to worship the calves and not go to Jerusalem and worship the temple. So what they're saying is, these guys, they would become king, and when you thought they were going to try to do better, they didn't do better, and they eventually they kept worshiping the same golden calves. You're also going to notice that if you're reading this and you've also read before, like the book of Judges, here's the cycle of the book of Judges. People lived their lives and they started doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord sent an enemy against them to oppress them and to discipline them. And then they cried out in the name of the Lord, and the Lord sent a deliverer, and He redeemed them, and He got them out of their trouble. But after they were out of their trouble, they went back. And so the book of Judges is this continual cycle, and the same exact language is used in this chapter, which I think is interesting. You're also going to see that, like in verse 4, it says, so Jehoahaz pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord listened to him. Man, isn't God good? Like, this is not a good guy. He's not a godly man, but the Lord listens. For he saw the oppression of Israel because of the king of Syria had oppressed him. Then the Lord gave Israel a deliverer. And so, the Lord is delivering His people out of this stuff. But what you're going to find is that crisis faith that like jailhouse religion, that stuff rarely lasts, because usually we're really good at, and somebody's about to go to jail. You hear them sirens? Usually people are really good at running to God and doing what's right when they're in trouble. But then they get out of trouble, and what happens? They just kind of drift back into the old ruts and patterns. And so that's what we see here. Now, John, what was your big takeaway from this?
All right, so my takeaway mainly comes from the part of the death of Elisha, my bad.
There you go.
And was looking at this. And so basically, I just liked how, so basically what happens is Elisha dies, and that's super sad because he was an awesome dude. And these people, they were burying this body, not Elisha's body, some other dude's body. But then they see some bandits, and they're like, "Oh no!" And so they basically just like throw the dude behind them, and then they run her off. But the dude kind of lands in Elisha's tomb, yeah, like that. And he lands in Elisha's tomb, but like that, as soon as he touches Elisha's body, he gets up and walks off. And so before this, a lot of people were like, "Oh no, the holy man is dead, and now we won't have like all the stuff that he gave us, like all these super powerful stuff." But what I feel like they forgot is not that these awesome miracles that were happening, those didn't come from Elisha. I mean, he might have been the tool that God used to do that, but those awesome miracles were really coming from God.
I love it. So I guess we could say it like this, that Elijah had gone to heaven. Elisha had been buried because he was dead. And so Elisha was dead, but who was still very much around?
God.
That's right. So I like to end this chapter with just this kind of last look. Verse 22 says this: "And Hazael, the king of Syria, oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz." But listen to this. "But the Lord was gracious to them, and he had compassion on them, and regarded them because of his covenant with," and these are names we hadn't heard in a long time, "Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And so, why was God continuing to be good to his people even though they were being bad to him? Here's why. Because God had not, would not, could not, and did not break his promise or forget his friends. So because God had been so good to make such good promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he was long-suffering and he was very patient with his people. Now, why is this important? Because the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was that through their family, all the nations of the world, all the people in the world would be blessed. And from that family, who did we get?
Jesus.
That's right. So why did God not forsake his people even when they deserved it? Because of a long-time promise in the past to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and stretching into the future, a promise to send the Messiah to save the rest of us. That's why I like this chapter. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow in 2 Kings chapter 14. Bye.